Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. My friend Lisa Slavid returns as a guest co-host and introduces her friend, Annalyn Cruz, to discuss Annalyn's journey off the relationship escalator and into her life as a remarkable solo. In particular, keep an eye out, or I should say an ear out, for something we have not talked about enough on the podcast, and that is how to have conversations about living your best life as a single person with people who subscribe to more conventional approaches to life and relationships. And for fun, we conclude by sharing the message we would give our younger selves if we could go back in time. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Annalyn Cruz. Annalyn is a first-generation Filipina-American, a Los Angeles native, and she currently lives in Oakland, California. She's a senior manager and strategist at Electronic Arts, where she focuses on leadership, management development, diversity, inclusion, equity, and career development within the company. She's a global advisor for Aspire, the Asian Pacific Islander Employee Resource Group at EA, which is short for Electronic Arts, where the team focuses on community building, activism, education, advocacy, and leadership development for its members and allies. Annalyn is happily solo and a regular listener of the podcast. Welcome, Annalyn.
Thank you, Peter.
We are joined by a special return guest co-host, Lisa Slavid. Lisa is an expert in strategic planning, positive psychology, strength building, motivation, and innovation. She has over 25 years of experience designing learning workshops, programs, and keynote speeches, working with organizations from corporations, universities, and nonprofits. She's an organizational consultant and executive coach and a Semester C trustee. And my favorite, of course, the creator of the P-Doodles cartoon series. Lisa was a guest on episode 17, one of my favorites, Lisa's Second Mountain. And she was a guest co-host for episode 48, Digital Nomads. Lastly, Lisa introduced me to Annalyn, which means she has the inside scoop on Annalyn's remarkable life. Welcome back, Lisa.
Thanks for having me back. If I'm ever asked back again, I will shorten my bio for you. Sorry, Pete.
I should have edited it myself. You know what? You're not going to get asked back if we keep having echo problems. So we were having echo problems before this, but we are all sorted and ready to go. And I'm actually going to kick it over to you, Lisa, because, Lisa, there's a lot of pressure on you because you nominated Annalyn to be one of my rebellious, remarkable singles that I've been profiling on and off lately in the podcast. So why? Why are we...
Well, I'll pick it up from there.
Annalyn's like smiling big right now. She like has
I'm like, what's going to be said?
I know. Well, I've known Annalyn for about 20 years now. I knew her as an undergrad at UCSB, and then we ended up traveling the world together with a semester at sea and just becoming good friends. And I've also seen her through the beginning and the ending of a marriage. And she's an explorer. I've just been seeing her actually flourish as a solo and come into her own and actually kind of help others come into their own too, because she's a coach as well. She asks great questions. We listen to your podcast and we talk about it, and she just brought up really interesting concepts about her process in terms of like spreading her wings, and I can just see some of the joy she's experiencing, and also some cultural things too about some of the things she had to unpack with her upbringing in terms of really owning being a powerful solo. She does improv, so she's mildly funny. I don't want to say really funny, right? Mildly funny is the no pressure.
That's outstanding. Well, that's great. And also, I think, I can clearly see the overlap that the two of you have with regard to leadership, advocacy, consulting, coaching, diversity and inclusion. It's, so I could see why you two are friends and also aligned professionally. Mm-hmm. And I had this image of you two walking on the beach in Santa Barbara talking about solo episodes, although I recognize that's not how you're doing this, but that's where you two connect.
Well, it's funny because we did meet up a couple months ago, Lisa, I think when you were up here in the Bay Area, and that's when she mentioned solo to me. And she's like, you need to check out my friend Pete's podcast. I think it's really going to resonate with you, especially with what's going on in your life and what you're going through. And yeah, and I've been hooked ever since, to be honest with you. It's like I feel seen when I listen to, some particular episodes, and I'm like, finally, like there's something out there for us single people, because it's for everybody else who is partnered off or wants to get into a relationship or has kids. It's like, you get into this sort of monotony of like, well, what's left for me? And so I think that has filled some of that in terms of, just feeling seen and heard. And so thank you for having this podcast. I think it's fantastic.
This is as close as I'll ever get to being an evangelist. So when people shout out amen when they hear certain things, it makes me feel good. So before we get to your story, because I want to hear a little bit about your relationship escalator experience and then stepping off of it. Is there a particular episode that really had an effect on you? Is there some idea that kind of resonated with you as you've listened to this?
It was one of your first guests, and I apologize, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but one of the researchers who's been doing this work since
Bella DePaulo. Yeah.
Yes.
Episode 2. Yes.
Yes. Episode 2 really made a huge impact for me, because to hear of, actual research that's gone on for many, many years, and then just hearing about, people who are partnered off or married aren't always the happiest, and hear what, single people actually get out of their lives, and like the positive impact that can happen as a result of getting off the relationship escalator, that really resonated with me, especially having been in a long-term relationship, having done the marriage thing for a little bit and stepping off of that and just realizing like how much happier I am now. I mean, honestly, it's like I could say that with 100% truth around this is how I am experiencing life, and it's so much better. And I think, by sharing my story and just hearing other people also going through the same things, that just creates an impact of we're seen, we are here, our stories matter, our experiences matter. And so that's one of the things that for me, I just have really, really embraced being solo, especially over the pandemic, I would say as well. It's really given me some time to really reflect and journal and think within myself and really, meditate on some of this stuff as well, of what type of future do I want to create for myself by myself, and that feels really empowering. And I know for some folks, maybe that feels like a scary thought, but if there's one thing that I could, give back today in this conversation, it's I hope people feel a little more empowered about building and creating the lives that they want for themselves as a solo person. And it could be done.
Annalyn, I have a question for you too. I know Pete's podcast and his guests are pretty cool, but I also know that there was a struggle to get where you're at too. So I'm curious what you had to let go of.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think honestly, it's been about realizing how far back this has gone in terms of, wow, I've been on this relationship escalator, or I've been wanting to be on it since I was a little girl. Like, since I was thinking about this yesterday, I'm like, wow, probably since 4th or 5th grade in elementary school, when my best friend had a boyfriend. And I remember thinking to myself, why can't I be her? I'll be happier if I have what she has, right? And this has stayed with me up until my late 30s, I would say, right? Of just whether it's hearing from family, going to family parties and the first question out of everyone's mouth is, so are you dating anybody right now? No matter what was going on in my career, where I had traveled, Lisa and I had gone to semester at sea together 10 years ago. And that wasn't even a topic of conversation, right? None of the other things that were happening in my life, which were super important, super big to me, were never even asked about.
Yeah, you have an incredible CV, right? We got to take by the way, I asked Annalyn for her bio, and I've only given you a little bit of it, right? Like this woman is living a remarkable life professionally and obviously personally. And so I do want to ask about this. What you just described, is there someone special in your life?
Yeah.
And, in response to, I just traveled the world. I just got this new great job. I just moved to this wonderful new city. I just bought this house. I just X, Y, and Z is, I find, at best disturbing and at worst infuriating, because it's well intentioned, but it just diminishes, especially what women have been trying to do for generations, right? Which is to be
100%.
Able to. Exactly. And so to have someone just sort of casually, although as I admit it, these are people not trying to do harm. They're just seeing the world through their lens.
Yeah.
And so I want to follow up with how much of that, we know that's sort of part of the norm, but how much of that is connected culturally in your family?
Yeah, I think it's very much connected. I come from a Filipino background. Catholicism is huge in the Philippines for the past few hundred years, especially, when my parents were growing up there. And I just spoke to my mom recently because I wanted to get more insight as to what she thought about my own journey. And we had a really deep conversation last week about this. And she said, in the Philippines, generally speaking, people just kind of suffer through their relationships, right? Their marriages. That's what you do. You go and you get married and you have kids. And even if the marriage isn't going well, you just kind of suffer through it. And I mean, that just kind of broke my heart, right? Just thinking about relatives that I have, my own experience. And I think suffering through that relationship and thinking I just need to make it work, right? And so I think it very much ties in with people don't typically, at least back then when my parents were growing up in the Philippines, didn't get a divorce because it wasn't legal to do so.
Wow.
And sometimes people just have another relationship outside the marriage. Some people go back and forth between the US and the Philippines and have two separate families. And it's,
Wait, did I just hear this correctly? That you might have two separate, one's not enough? Someone may have two?
I mean, I've had relatives and I've had friends who, will say yeah, my dad has another family, but he's still married to my mom. And, it's just sort of a deal that my parents have between each other where, they're still
Someone
married.
Should tell these guys they don't need to get the whole family in order to have, a little bit on the side.
I don't even know. Not something that I'm interested in, but yeah, well, but I think that there is something to do with, obviously the nuclear family and just that relationship escalator, people going through that. And, it's something that I've actively tried to go against at this point. I don't believe that you have to have that in order to be happy.
I want to point out something before Lisa, I know, wants to chime in, but I want to point out one thing and ask a quick follow-up. So one is, and this is for someone who hasn't listened to episode 2 yet, but one of the things that we've done on Solo time and time again is bust a bunch of myths. And that's something that Bella has been doing for her entire career. I'll point out a few, both from that episode and from elsewhere. But first of all, the idea that marriage makes you happy, there is no evidence that marriage makes you happy. We know that marriages can, but we also know that marriages will make you unhappy, as evidenced by a 35% divorce rate. But the idea of like there's a treatment, you get married and you become happier, zero evidence for that. The other one is that this idea that we solos are selfish. So first of all, I respond to that in two ways. One is everyone's selfish to some degree. We should be pursuing happiness in our life. We should be pursuing a life in which we flourish. I believe that to be a good endeavor. I think that when an individual flourishes, she or he actually helps other people in their life flourish. In part, for example, Lisa is flourishing, right? Lisa's climbing her second mountain, and now she brings you into the fold and helps give you an alternative narrative that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And the last one is, and this one I think is really striking, half of single adults in the United States are not interested in dating and a relationship at the moment. And that goes against everything that we're being told. We think that every single person wants to find love and is eager to do it and is waiting around for it. And that is very clearly not the case for a lot of people. It's normal to want it. It's normal to not want it. There's nothing abnormal about what your wants and desires as a single person. That's my first. I just had to do a little PSA. Apologies for those of you who've heard this time and time again. But I want to follow up on what you said, Annalyn, because you said you had a conversation with your mother and about this. And I want to find out more about this because I think that there are a lot of solos out there who are committed to their solo life, unapologetic about it, and yet the people they love don't understand it, need to be educated in some way because parents, aunts, uncles, friends, whoever, think they have the answer for you when they actually don't. And I think that those can be, and you too have these conversations with people all the time. You help teach people to think in new ways. So if either, both of you could talk a little bit about that, because what I don't know yet is how to tell someone to talk to an important person in their life about how they're happy, how they're pursuing this path at this time, and that they should not worry. Do not worry about me. I have this under control. So maybe we'll start with your conversation with your mom, and then the two of you can help others by helping them navigate these tough conversations.
Well, what's interesting about our conversation was that sort of what we unpacked was my marriage dissolving and how she felt during that time, because we're a family that doesn't typically talk about our feelings and all that good stuff. And so when I asked her that, she said, at the time you were pretty clear, and I wrote her both of my parents this long letter about what happened, and I didn't want to hear any sort of advice or questions being asked about what happened.
Did you mail this letter?
I did. I snail mailed it.
Wow, that's old school.
My parents are old school, so I snail mailed this, and I was just like, here we go. I dropped it off at the mailbox, the post office, and I'm like, there's no going back. And I will say that one of the other things I did was when I moved out of the house that we lived in together, I got my own place, signed the lease, got new furniture. I did all of this because I didn't want my family to worry. And going back to the cultural piece, I think that was another thing where I did feel a lot of shame around that, right? And I felt embarrassed, and I felt like I was a failure for not, having made it work. And I had to spend years unpacking that. Anyway, fast forward to our conversation last week, and my mom said, I was really sad when it ended, and I was hoping that you guys would work it out. And I told her, Mom, I'm actually really happy now. And I'm so glad that it did end, because there were a lot of things you just didn't know about that relationship that I only discovered years after, of like why I needed to be by myself and why I'm so much happier. And I'm so much of my authentic, real self now, so much more than I was in that relationship. I left myself in that relationship. And that's a really hard lesson for me to kind of reflect on. And I share that because I think for some of us who have gone through that, or maybe going through that right now, it's really tough to think, wow, I'm like a shell of who I used to be. And that's what one of my best friends at the time said to me. Like, I don't even recognize who you are because you've lost your voice in this relationship. Right. So what I think I've been empowered with over the past few years is getting back my voice and like getting back to who am I really, like, what do I want in this life? Right. Like, what do I want to build for myself that doesn't involve a partner, a romantic partner? It involves many friends. It involves my family. It involves my dog. Like, you know, and if a partner happens to show up, if I happen to meet an awesome person, cool. But that's not what I'm going to be striving towards. So I think the conversation with my mom, going back to that, is she was, I think, kind of a little bit surprised when she heard that, because she didn't know a lot that was happening at the time. And she was like, you know what? Like, you are my hero for actually taking a stand and like standing up for what you really want for yourself. Like, not a lot of people do that.
What a reversal.
Yeah, it was a really, really awesome conversation, and it goes to show you that, you know, even if you come from a family that doesn't talk about your feelings too often, it is possible if you open the door for that.
Well, it sounds like you had a lot of compassion for her and patience with her and thoughtfulness for your parents, and writing a letter and mailing it and meeting them in a space where they could listen.
Yeah. Because I knew if I were to have a phone call about it, there would be all these questions and like, are you sure? Or, you know, whatever would come up or what I thought would come up at the time. And so for me, it was important to just write that letter, state my boundaries at the time, state what I needed from them. I think that was really important as well. And they respected that.
That's great. They love you.
They do. They
do. They love you.
Yeah.
You know, I like the letter thing because it's not a negotiation. A phone call feels like a negotiation sometimes. And it feels like you're seeking, you know, feedback or, you know, in that sense. And I think with these ideas, you know, it's interesting if you're me, if you're Lisa, if you're your regular listener, these are not radical ideas anymore. They're now they now feel normal to you. But these are radical ideas to some people. You know, these are threatening ideas. They threaten a person's identity as a husband or a wife or someone who wants the escalator, you know, has been thinking about it since 4th grade. And it's everywhere, right? It's in their TV, it's in the children's books, and it's in the movies, it's in the songs, it's on Instagram, it's everywhere. And people are putting forth their best their best show, so to speak. So this is both for Lisa and you. I want to get back to this because I think there's this paradox, which is if you ask parents, what do you want for your child? They say, I want my child to be happy. And then the next thing is they say, this is how my child should be happy. And those things can be in conflict in this case. So a divorce may make you happy, but a parent doesn't approve of the divorce. How should listeners who want to be able to start talking unapologetically about where they are in life, about what their long-term goals are, being single for now or forever, how do they have these conversations with their loved ones who are well-intentioned but misinformed?
You know, so it's funny, when I was listening to Annalyn, I just had this flashback to coming out to my dad, you know, like 30 years ago. And I was really lucky when I came out to my parents. They were divorced, and it was funny. The first question they each asked was, does your mom know? Does your dad know? So that was just as a child of divorced parents, I was like, is this relevant right now? But they were both supporting and loving, you know, but it was still a stage and a phase. They weren't like already like super excited. Like I remember specifically when my dad saying, you know, I can understand this. I love women too, so that makes a lot of sense to me.
Women are great.
Women are great. So that part was, but he said the only reason I would wish that you weren't gay is because life's going to be harder. And so to me, it was also, my dad wasn't the first person like I came out to. So to listeners, I would say, as you're sharing with loved ones some, the path that you're on, is to, take it for a test drive with friends, do those, calls and beach walks or whatnot, just have some reflection. So if somebody comes at you with a response that you're like I didn't say to my dad, well, that's homophobic. Like, he just was being a dad and wanted to be protective. But the irony of that is that I just needed to be myself. And so not being myself was going to be harder than being myself. So he's like, I just know this is going to make life a little bit harder for you. And, in some ways he meant with discrimination, and I get that. But actually, the rewards in being true to myself, and a lot of this, I think, is our journeys of just being true to ourselves. And so how do you help the people who love you and have a concept about you that is a certain way? How do you help them evolve with you? And gosh, I'm imagining that it's part of their evolution as well, too. So to hold space for them to change and grow in this, Annalyn, hearing your mom talk about you being her hero and being, her lens was, it sounds like you just put up with it. You suffer, you patience,
stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
Put on a good show.
Yeah. Yeah. Adjust the straps and just keep going. That there could be, not even the possibility of saying like, okay, now it's ended, but the possibility of talking, it opens up the door to talking about like, hello, this is painful, and then maybe figuring it out together, wherever it goes from there. So I don't know what that sparks for you, Annalyn.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about is being able to show your loved ones and, whoever's asking these questions, hey, I know you are really invested in my relationship status or partnership status, and that's not really a priority for me right now. Like, I have flat out said to people, like, yeah, that's just not something I'm spending my time and my energy on, because I'm focused on moving up in my career or building my own coaching business or really cultivating my friendships in a different way and spending time with folks who I really want to hang out with and understand me completely. And that's just not where I'm focusing my energy on. Let me tell you about some cool things that's actually happening with me, right? Like, let me share with you these other parts of my wheel of life, right? Like all the other slices of the pie that you may not know about because you may be focused on this one sliver. So I think that has helped me in conversations with loved ones of, let me tell you about some of the cool things that I'm learning about myself or that I'm doing, or this new way of being that I'm creating in this world right now. And so I think that has over time refocused some of the conversations that may have happened in the past. And then I also think as I get older, people are like, oh, whatever, we've lost whatever faith we have in.
It helps to get older. It does.
Yeah. It's like, okay, I guess we just gave up on that idea. But,
No one asked me any. You know what? Start a podcast called Solo. No one will ever ask you again.
That's right. So I mean, honestly, people have not asked me a whole lot since then for whatever reason, is that I'm cool with that.
So if I can for a moment, I sort of hear this like sort of there's these 3 steps, not exactly, but one is you have to be honest with yourself. That is, you have to really decide, at this stage in my life, and I think it's important to say at this moment in time, I don't talk a lot about the pandemic, but I feel like one of the benefits of the pandemic is it has made me and it made many of us as present focused as we have ever been. I'm a forward focused person. I'm always thinking about the future. I'm always planning and strategizing and sometimes to my detriment, living in the future too much. Here, because we don't even know what the future looks like, it makes you be present. You say, at this moment, this is what lights me up. This is how I'm going to be my most remarkable self. Then the idea is to be honest with others that that's the path that you're on and that they may need some re-education and some readjustment. So you just said something that I think is really good, and I'm always looking for a title idea. So I like this idea of our romantic relationships are just a sliver of who we are.
Yeah.
It's not all of who we are. It's not our entire identity. And so to be able to say, that's just a small part of my life right now. Look at all these other things and how exciting they are. And then, I think the last thing, and if I can add to what you two are saying, is I appreciate that you care about me and that you want me to be happy and thrive, and you don't want me to be an outsider and deal with discrimination and so on. However, you have to trust that this is right, for me. This is not an arbitrary decision. This is something I've given thought to, and that there are many ways to live a good life.
Yeah.
And this is mine at this moment. But it's hard. These things are hard because especially parents, especially older adults.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. In psychology, there's transactional analysis where it's triangle of communication between people. So parent, adult, child. And so, yes, with parents especially, sometimes instead of speaking adult to adult, it can slip back into parent, child, or it can flip too. You can start parenting your parent. But I think behind people's concerns really, or pressure, could just be fear. Like, are you going to be okay, Annalyn, when you're 20 years older? Are you going to be lonely? And so maybe, and that people are carrying maybe their fears with them that are relating to just to themselves and not even you. And it's fair, people that we love and who love us care about us. And so I think especially with older generations, they just want to make sure that you can stack life as easy as for yourself as possible. And being single might seem really hard to them.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention was that my dad, I remember early on, was like, well, who's going to take care of you? And I'm like, what do you mean who's going to take care of me? And I was like, I make my own money. Like, I am planning for the future. Trust me. Like, this is not something I'm willy-nilly deciding to do. Like, I'm very conscious and very deliberate about the type of life that I'm having now and the type of life I want to lead for the future. But I think that is, what my dad shared is something that many parents share, right? Mm-hmm. Like, well, I'm concerned about you being by yourself, like alone and decrepit, like somewhere, and you're going to be out on your own, and who's going to be there to support you? And for me, I mean, one of the things that I've really, really been thinking about over the past couple months, especially, is my friends are the family that I truly have chosen, right? And I believe that many of these people are going to be in my life later on in the future. And I would love a Golden Girls situation. Look, put me up with Blanche and Sophia and Dorothy and Rose. Like, I'm down for that, That's the type of solo lifestyle I want to be living when I'm in my 70s and 80s. It's like, I love that. I love that idea.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There's lots of ways to do this. And this idea is like, we don't live on farms anymore where we need this familial unit to make things work. There are other ways. There are new technologies, innovations. There's this thing called money that can solve a lot of problems if you do a good job, saving it and planning for the future. I love that you have a plan. I want to ask about this reinvention. I love this word reinvention. I use it in the podcast all the time. It's one of my 3 R's: to recognize, to rebel, and to reinvent. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the ways that you've reinvented yourself, and what freedoms have you experienced as a result of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first part of the reinvention process is the consciousness of, I'm going to take a different path, right? I'm just going to take a different path than what the majority of my friends are doing or what my family expects me to do. And I'm going to stick to that because in my soul, I know that this is the path I want moving forward.
And can you just say a little bit what that is?
Yeah. Well, for example, your follow-up question was like, what freedoms do I have? I mean, yesterday, I was hanging out with my best friend and we were roller skating on her deck at like 7:30 at night. And the sun was setting. It was a beautiful night in Oakland. I'm like, if I was married with kids right now, I would not be able to be roller skating on a deck and trying out, my new pink glitter skates, right? And there are just moments where I'm like, oh, I'm taking a hike with a friend and I'm not at a soccer game with my kids. Or, wow, yes, I'm going to go to Cambodia with Lisa and another friend of ours, Kate, in 2022. And I literally, I saw the deal and I called up Lisa and I'm like, hey, you want to go to Cambodia end of 2022?
Let's do it.
And she was like,
you're like, yes.
Yeah. The three of us booked it that afternoon. We're like, we're going to Cambodia, you know? And I wouldn't be able to do that if I was in a different situation, right? And I could spend my money on like redecorating my place the way that I want to redecorate it. And I don't have to negotiate anything with a partner or think about,
I don't want your throw pillows. I don't want
No,
that.
I don't want your neon sign that's going to be up in the
I don't want your St.
cave.
Polly's girl neon sign in my basement.
Go back to the office. Yes,
it's so funny
exactly.
It's so funny you say this. I have a friend, and he's solo minded, and I sent him an Airbnb apartment, 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment in Buenos Aires, and I said, "What do you think?" And he's like, "Oh, this is," and I said, "Why don't we just pick a date? You know, let's just pick a date." And and what you often get is, well, I don't know, you know, I'm gonna have to. Let me get back to you on that. And so he just wrote back, let's, you know, so there is that element.
Yeah,
that element
absolutely.
Pete, can I take a slightly different angle about the question you asked, which you asked about Annalyn in terms of, I think, you know, what kind of freedoms she's feeling. I'm curious, Annalyn, do you remember any aha moments on this journey that you had? Like, oh, this is going to be okay, or I get to try this out. Any transformational, or maybe it was a surrendering.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. You know, being able to buy my condo on my own was a very pivotal moment. Part of it was I was able to do that because of the divorce, right? And how that's all shake down. And I remember when I finally got the keys and I was kind of settling in, thinking to myself, ugh, like I have this place and I know I should be happy and I know I should be feeling fortunate, but I have this place because I failed at my marriage. Like that was my mindset, you know, 6 years ago. I was like, ugh, I don't know if I could really enjoy this, right? And now, fast forward to 2021, I love it. Like I feel like I'm in a completely different space of just like, this is my own space. I could create, you know, especially during the pandemic, like my little home for myself. And it is all about the way that I want to do things and how I invite people over and just like creating a warm space for myself to really take care of myself. And so I think that looking back on where my mindset was back then and where it is now was, I mean, I still honestly, like I had this thought in my head this past week where I was like, I feel really, really lucky and fortunate. Like to have
wonderful.
To have this place and to have the life that I have and be able to have the wonderful friends around me and community. And I've been feeling full of like abundance and gratitude, honestly.
So what have you done with the place that you wouldn't have done otherwise? And how have you entertained in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise? Yeah.
Well, I mentioned this earlier. I recently kind of redecorated the place and really, you know, so part of the process for me was getting rid of the old furniture that I either had from before as a result of having to leave the house that I was in. And I just was looking around. I'm like, it was like a darker wood and some with stuff I got off Craigslist because I was kind of broke at the time. And I'm like, you know what? I'm in a space where I could fortunately afford this and be able to create a space that I want for myself that feels good and that I could entertain people when things are back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I love having people over and for them to step into my space and feel like it's their own, right? And before I felt like I had to negotiate that with someone else, right? And so there's no negotiation. It's only me. And that to me feels like such an awesome freedom. And I don't know, maybe for some people that sounds like, what's the big deal about that? But I've really been thinking about that quite a bit of, wow, I created this. Like I helped design the way in which I'll be living and the aesthetics and how it feels. And there's just a new energy in my space now. I really believe that makes a difference.
Yeah, I always talk about this. One way to start a reinvention process is to tidy up. And there's different ways that you can tidy up. And one way to tidy up is to get rid of this old furniture and to donate it, to give it away, to sell it, to find a better home for it, a home that it's going to fit better in. And so it sounds like you tidied up your entire living space by redecorating.
Yeah, I definitely reorganized. I threw away stuff that no longer served me. I KonMari'd, I still need a lot to do, but I think that was a part of it. And I think the other thing is, Lisa, going back to your question, it's really being firm and really being proud within myself of, this is the life that I'm leading for myself. Like I'm going to stand and be proud in what I've created for myself as a solo person, right? And really being not ashamed of that, but really proud of it. And I think the difference in the past has been I was embarrassed, right? Or I was like ashamed about the life that I felt like I was failing at, when really it was the complete 180 from that. And so I think even just philosophically thinking about, no, this is my mindset moving forward, and this is how I'm going to be living. And I feel like it shows in terms of my own energy and what I even coach people about if they're struggling with the same things, which I often hear from with some of my clients where, they may be, they're at the, fork in the road, right? Of deciding, should I leave this relationship or not? Like, I'm scared. I've never been on my own since like high school, right? Like I've always been in a monogamous relationship. Like, what does this mean for me moving forward? And so, what's important for me as a coach is to really start exploring other possibilities that this person may be dreaming about, but maybe even too scared to say it out loud. And so, I was working with one person recently who is making that big decision, right? About what to do moving forward. Should I leave or should I stay? And so it's not my job as a coach to tell this person what to do. However, it is my job to be able to explore other possibilities and to explore other dreams that they may have been scared to say out loud.
I kind of have a follow-up question for you with that. Curious about a coaching question you might ask yourself, so tuck that away. But I'm wondering, Annalyn, I know I can hear the joy in your voice when you talk about not having to negotiate and, wearing your pink roller skates, like you're exploring things. And there's almost like you're at this stage right now where there's an excitement and an ease to it. But I'm curious if you can share a stage where there was, where you had to push yourself, what was scary, like what, how. Sometimes folks, a big revelation that they've had is like, oh my gosh, I went out to eat dinner by myself for the first time, or I went to the movies by myself for the first time. And I hear that as part of people's steps in just being okay being alone. And so I'm just curious if you had any like that, like where you had to push yourself to go do something or try something.
Yeah, I remember early on having meals by myself, going to restaurants alone. Sometimes that happens when I have to travel for work anyway, so that was good practice. But I love doing that around Oakland, right? Like I'll just go and have a meal by myself. The other thing I would say that was hard in the beginning was sleeping alone in my own bed, right? Like that was tough when you leave a relationship and, if you were sharing a bed together, like that's hard I remember that first night and I couldn't sleep. And I just remember thinking like, how am I going to do this? And there were just many, many moments where I felt, I don't know if I could do this. I feel like I'm under the rubble. Like how am I going to get past this? And it sounds cliche, but I think part of it is with time. The other part is deep therapy. I will just plug that for everyone who hasn't done it.
Episode 17, how to find a therapist.
Yes. My therapist has been instrumental in my journey with me. And, the other thing I think is, again, for me, I felt like I lost part of myself, right? So what did it mean to regain who I really was again and discovering that process? So part of it was, rediscovering improv again, taking more improv classes, or it was, I'm going to try roller skating again since I haven't done it since I was like in junior high. It's picking up things that I either said I didn't have time for before, or that I didn't have to negotiate anything with someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much really wonderful stuff there. One of the things I would add to that is, and this is me as a psychologist speaking, is that people fail to anticipate the magic of adaptation. That is, that humans are adaptation machines. Now, unfortunately, we're better at adapting to positive things than to negative things, but nonetheless, we are able to cope and to change and so on. So that first night sleeping alone, one might say, oh my God, how am I going to do this? But you will adapt to this new situation. There is a flip side to this. There are those people who are like, oh my God, I get to sleep alone.
I love it now.
I get to sleep.
I can't imagine it the other way around now. Honestly, it's like, how do I flip back to that if that ever happens?
But I do think like there are these, there's this sort of, we bring to the world our own perspective, and our own perspective is based a bit upon, the domestication that we have undergone. You've talked about it culturally, in particular, and so on. And so I had a conversation where I was sort of making a cheeky comment about divorce, and a woman said, couldn't believe that I was framing a divorce in a positive way. Like, it was impossible for her to see how a divorce is anything but a massive failure rather than a massive celebration. And I think that it's, and so this is a theme of our conversation is how do you sort of re-educate yourself? And if solo helps, I'm thrilled. And if your friends help, obviously that's great. Your chosen family and so on. And then this idea that you might have to either, kind of re-educate someone else. And I know Lisa and I have talked about this at times with regard to her being a lesbian, which is like, okay, here I go again. I got to take this person who, again, is well-intentioned, well-meaning. This person is not a bigot, but they don't understand. And I got to do this lift again to be able to explain all these things. And it is a burden, I think. But it seems like a worthwhile one for our circles to be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
It gets better.
It does.
It really
will get better.
does.
Yeah.
It really does. I do want to add that, while I probably sound really positive and I'm like, yeah, and I do feel that way for sure. And I've hit rock bottom, right? I have hit rock bottom over the past few years where I didn't always feel this way. So just know that if you're there, or if you are concerned about hitting rock bottom, like, it happens to all of us, right? And you have to almost go through that process in order to come out the other side, honestly. Like, it's just a part of the process.
So so Lisa, what Lisa just said has got me thinking of a final question, if I can. And so Lisa, you said it's going to be okay. And so this is for all of us. I'll answer too. What advice would you give if you could, show up in the night to your younger self and give that person advice about being solo? So this is a two elements to the thing. At what age would you do it? And what would you say to your younger self?
Oh, I would start so early. I would start at like the age of 5 of saying to my younger self, you are whole on your own. You do not need a romantic partner in order to feel whole. Because I think that's what I was searching for back in the day. And again, up until my late 30s. So it's know that you are completely whole as you are, and you have other parts of your circle of life, your pie, however you want to look at it. Again, this is one sliver. And if you choose that path, that's cool. But just know that there's so many other things out there for you to have a full life, and you already have it right now. You don't
Wow.
you don't need to
5.
be
I'm impressed.
you don't need to find anybody to complete yourself. That's bullshit.
And you would show up. This would not be a letter. You would show up.
Exactly. I would show up.
That's great.
Not a snail mail letter.
Excellent. Lisa has been sitting, as you've been answering, Lisa's been quite pensive considering
I see that.
this.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what age I would do, and then that brings into like, the whole thing about sexual orientation. Like, would I start at 5 and say, hey, whoever you are, just be you, so that spun me in a loop. But in terms of relationship or being solo, I think I'd probably drop in with my 20-year-old self and just pretty much say, I've been a serial monogamist with chunks of time between relationships, and sometimes those chunks of time have caused me a little bit of angst, but I think that my compass was still pointing myself in the right direction. Like, connect with people who are worthwhile, who click with you, don't force anything. But I think I would go back to my 20-year-old self and just pretty much say, like, it's a little bit like surfing, and just be in flow with it. Enjoy the time you have with people, and enjoy the time you're not with people. And I think also I would say to myself, it's okay to have a romantic interlude, which is different than I think having a one night stand, which I've personally have not done because lesbians are notorious for, moving in on the second date. So, but I have, as I've gotten older, I've had romantic interludes where I knew it was, it was more than one night, but I knew that it wasn't going to go in that, escalator, but it was just really enjoyable anyways. And so I think that I would just go back and just say, hey, there's going to be a lot of flavors out there, and just, and just know that there's an ebb and a flow to that. Just go with it.
I use the word tryst, but I like interlude better. Tryst has slightly too much of a negative connotation.
Oh, I got that from a hiking guide in South Africa. Sorry, things go back to semester at sea. And he was leading a hike of like 30 college students, and he just said, this program seems like it would be ideal for romantic interludes. And I was like, yes.
You're like, yes, it is.
It is.
Absolutely. That's fun to listen to. There is a temptation for me to go back to my 14-year-old self, 13-year-old self, and tell him, this is all going to be okay. Like it turns out great, and so on. But I wouldn't actually. I think that pain and those experiences and the uncertainty that it would turn out great would put me at a disadvantage. I think that in many ways, I'm very happy that I had challenges early in my life. And in part because if it was easy, I just don't think I would have the tenacity that I do now. I think it would have made me lazy. But I would go back to my 20s, and I'm going to ask Lisa to tell me the age that she thinks, once I tell you what my older self is going to tell my younger self. I'm going to let Lisa pick the age in my 20s. And that is, I would tell my younger self, Pete, you are not conventional. You're not normal. And that's good. That this is not a weakness, this is a strength. This is not a bug, this is a feature. And as a result of the fact that you are unconventional in the way you think and behave and approach the world, you're going to benefit from it. And I think that's when I was starting to recognize that in my 20s. I was starting to feel out of place. And so, but Lisa knew me, met me at 24, and we worked together till I was 27, and obviously have kept in touch since then. When do you think, what time do you think that message would have been most
Probably
useful
21.
for me, Lisa?
Just in terms of legal drinking age. And I think you were like, you could have been, you're a big sporty guy. And so you could have just fallen into like, this is what you do. You go watch sports and you drink. And so I think maybe at 21, that message would have been good to be like, you don't have to go that direction. Like it's okay knowing that you're going to be unconventional. That would be my
Yeah, I didn't really start drinking till I was 25, and in looking back at it, I could have just as easily avoided that. As someone who doesn't drink much anymore, that chunk of time, I don't think alcohol added that much value. Some fun times. I mean, alcohol's fun, but yeah, that's great. All right, well, this has really been super. It's just so interesting. Like I have. My mind is just racing with possibilities. And one of the things that I'm really happy that we were able to do, Annalyn, with regard to your story, besides celebrating your remarkable single life and hearing the joy in your voice and giving people further examples of this, is how to have those conversations, because that's not something we've talked a lot about. We've talked a lot about the sort of educating people, but we haven't talked about how to talk to other people in our lives who don't listen to the podcast, who don't say amen,
right,
hallelujah,
right.
In that point. Are there any closing thoughts for the two of you about those conversations? You two do this for a living. You help people change the way they see the world. You help people, coaching them, guiding them, opening their minds up. Is there anything that you would say as a sort of parting bit of wisdom for our listeners who want to be able to lean into those conversations if they want to?
One thing that came to my mind over the past couple minutes is I want to just reemphasize that your self-worth is not tied to your romantic relationship status. And I think that as long as you truly believe that and keep reminding yourself about that, that will show in these conversations with your loved ones or people who may be concerned about where you're at this point in your life. And to actually say, like, my self-worth isn't tied to that. Here's what else I have going on in my life that makes me who I am. And I hope you could be happy for me because of that.
Yeah. It's a sliver. I love this idea. It's a sliver. It's not the whole pie.
Yeah.
All right. Lisa wants to end on that. I love it. Lisa Slavid, welcome back. Thanks so much. It's always good to hear your voice. I so appreciate that you nominated this remarkable single. Annalyn, it's so great to meet you. I'm inspired, and I think you will inspire listeners. There are people listening saying amen, hallelujah to your story. I hope they're inspired to redecorate, to buy those the roller skates, to enjoy those sunsets, rather than cooking pork chops and mashed potatoes.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciated the time we all had together. Thank you.
Cheers.
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 Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.